Cop punched a girl thinking she was a criminal. Then the FBI erupted when she flashed her badge. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Stop the music! The shout cracked through the warm air like a gunshot. Every conversation died mid-laugh. The brass band froze, horns suspended in disbelief. A white police officer in pressed blues marched through the rows of white chairs, hand on his belt, his eyes fixed on the groom, a tall black man in an ivory suit, standing under a flower arch. The smell of champagne and magnolia drifted through the tension, sweet and bitter all at once. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and the next 60 seconds would decide whether this was just a wedding or a reckoning. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Elijah. He didn't flinch, not when the officer's boots clapped against the wooden deck, not when guests whispered his name, not even when his bride, Maya, reached for his hand under the veil and whispered, "Stay calm." His silence wasn't fear, it was history holding its breath. The officer stopped 5 feet away, chest out, voice sharp. "Sir, we got a call about a suspicious gathering, possible noise violation." He glanced around the crowd of elegantly dressed guests, mostly black, their joy now replaced by confusion. "And who's in charge here?" The question wasn't procedural, it was personal. Elijah's jaw tightened. His best man, Darius, stepped forward. "It's a wedding, officer. You see the cake, the vows, the ring?" The cop ignored him. "I'm talking to him." His finger jabbed the air toward Elijah like an accusation. A murmur rippled across the aisle. The bandleader muttered under his breath, "Man, not today." The officer's hand brushed the holster again, a gesture so practiced it didn't need intent to intimidate. Maya's veil fluttered in the sudden stillness. Her eyes glistened, not from tears, but rage she couldn't express without ruining the day she'd planned for months. The officer smirked. "You hosting this event, sir? Got a permit?" Elijah's calm voice broke the silence like a blade. "We do. Signed, sealed, and posted by City Hall." He turned slightly, his tone steady, deliberate. "Would you like to speak to the guests who issued it?" The officer blinked, confused. Guests began turning their heads, rows of them, toward the back tables where 2 people were already rising. One in a navy suit with the gold crest of the city pinned to his lapel, the other wearing the quiet authority of law itself. The mayor and the police chief. The same system that trained this officer to see threat where there was joy had just walked straight into his own mirror. The murmurs grew into a low hum. The chief's voice cut across the lawn, slow and heavy. "Officer Hale, explain why you're here." The color drained from the man's face. Elijah didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just looked at him steady, measured, unbroken. The band was silent, the guests were still, and in that suspended moment, every stereotype in the officer's mind collapsed under the weight of its own irony. The wedding wasn't interrupted by music or vows anymore, it was interrupted by truth, and the truth had perfect timing. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. The white officer stood frozen under the afternoon sun, his badge catching the light like a mirror reflecting his own mistake. The mayor, a composed man in his 60s, began walking toward the ceremony with the police chief beside him. Guests parted as they passed. The sound of their footsteps over the deck was the only thing breaking the silence. Officer Hale swallowed hard. He had not realized the man in the ivory suit was Elijah Brooks, the new tech entrepreneur who had moved to the city 3 months earlier, the one whose company had just signed a multi-million-dollar partnership with the mayor's own Smart District initiative. Hale's voice trembled, but he tried to hold on to authority. "Sir, I was just following up on a complaint. A neighbor reported a large crowd and loud music. Nothing personal." Elijah's tone stayed calm but sharp. "You called in backup to a wedding because of music?" The officer hesitated. "Sir, we get reports like this all the time." The mayor's voice cut in. "Not at this address, you do not." He turned to Hale, his eyes cold. "You barged into a private event without confirming jurisdiction, without checking permits, and without respect. "Do you realize who these people are?" Hale stammered. "No, sir, I did not know." The police chief, a black woman named Lorraine Grant, crossed her arms. "That is the problem, Officer Hale. You never ask who. You assume." She stepped closer, lowering her tone so only he and Elijah could hear. "You saw color before you saw context. Elijah's bride, Maya, stepped beside him now, her voice clear but trembling. This was supposed to be the safest day of our lives." The guests murmured softly, a wave of empathy rolling through the garden. Darius, the best man, spoke again. "You see how quick that badge moves when we are the ones celebrating." Hale's face flushed red. "I did not mean any harm." The mayor sighed. "Intent does not undo impact." Lorraine pulled out her phone. "Body cam footage?" Hale nodded weakly. "Running." She took the device from his chest, pressed a button, and played back the last few seconds. Through the tiny speaker came his own voice, sharp, commanding, "Stop the music! Hands where I can see them." The sound cut through the garden like an echo of history itself. A few guests gasped. Others shook their heads. Maya whispered, "That is how they talk to suspects, not newlyweds." Elijah stepped forward. His voice was even but powerful, each word deliberate. "Officer, you entered my wedding, humiliated my guests, and frightened my wife, all because someone could not stand to hear black joy on their street." Hale's mouth opened, but no words came out. Lorraine looked at the mayor. "I will handle this internally." The mayor nodded. "No, we handle it publicly. Let the people see that our city does not hide its mistakes." Elijah turned to his guests, raising a hand. "Please, everyone, sit. We will continue in a moment." But no one moved. The crowd wanted to see how this story ended. Elijah took a breath, his calm returning like armor. "Officer Hale," he said, "I do not need an apology right now. I need acknowledgement." The officer blinked. "Of what?" Elijah looked at him steadily. "That what happened here was not about noise. It was about perception. You saw a celebration and thought it was trouble. You saw a black groom and thought he needed control." Lorraine's gaze stayed fixed on Hale. "You can start your report with that sentence." The mayor leaned toward Elijah. "Do you wish to press charges?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "No. I want accountability, not revenge." Maya slipped her hand into his, and for the first time since the interruption, she smiled faintly. "Then let them all hear it," she said. Elijah nodded once, then turned back to the officer. "This is what justice looks like, Hale. Calm, clear, and unforgettable." The afternoon sun tilted lower, casting long shadows across the wedding garden as murmurs spread through the guests. Cameras from a few local reporters, who had been invited to cover the event as a feature on Community Success, were now rolling silently from the back. Officer Hale shifted his stance, his confidence dissolving under the weight of every lens now fixed on him. The police chief, Lorraine Grant, spoke in a calm, unwavering voice. "You said you were responding to a call. Who made that call?" Hale hesitated, pulling out his radio. Static filled the air as he scrolled through his dispatch log. "Anonymous report," he muttered. "Said there were unfamiliar people in the area and loud activity." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "Unfamiliar. That is the word they used." Elijah's voice followed, low but precise. "Unfamiliar, meaning black." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. The mayor's face hardened as he looked toward the street beyond the white picket fence where a few onlookers had gathered, watching the spectacle they had created. "We will trace that call," he said firmly. "I will not have our city turn into a place where joy is policed." Hale's radio buzzed. A dispatcher's voice came through, thin and distorted. "Confirming call originated from 219 Garden Hill Lane." A woman in a blue dress near the back gasped quietly. That was the address of the neighboring property. Lorraine glanced at her team of accompanying officers, who had remained respectfully outside the perimeter. "Send someone to verify that report," she ordered. "And turn off that body cam, Officer Hale. This is no longer an incident, it is an inquiry." Hale obeyed, hands trembling slightly. The wedding guests still stood, silent witnesses to a confrontation that had shifted from embarrassment to revelation. Elijah took a slow breath. "You see, this is what it looks like when bias hides behind procedure. One call, one assumption, and suddenly an entire celebration turns into an investigation." His words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Maya squeezed his hand gently, grounding him in the moment. The mayor stepped closer, voice steady. "Mr. Brooks, You have my word that this will be handled directly by my office. Officer Hale will be relieved of duty pending review. Elijah nodded, but his gaze did not leave the officer's face. That will not fix the real problem, he said. This is not about one man. It is about a pattern. The guests murmured in agreement. Darius stepped forward again, his voice louder now. You think this is new? It is the same look we get every time we succeed in spaces they did not expect us to be. Lorraine turned toward him. Not anymore, she said firmly. Not while I am chief. She faced the crowd. For too long our city has ignored what people feel when they see that badge approach. Fear, distrust, that ends here. The sound of clapping began softly, almost hesitant at first, then stronger as more guests joined. Elijah held up his hand for quiet. We are not done yet, he said. Accountability starts with truth, and truth needs to be recorded. He turned to the media crew in the back. Keep those cameras on. The mayor looked uncertain for a moment but did not object. Elijah continued, his tone unwavering. This is not just about my wedding. It is about every family told they are too loud, every child told they do not belong, every man stopped because someone thought he looked suspicious. He paused, letting the silence breathe. Today was supposed to be about love. Maybe it still can be if we choose to learn from what almost ruined it. Lorraine nodded, her eyes meeting his. Then let us make this moment count, she said. We will release the footage, file a public statement, and confront the system that made this possible. Hale lowered his head, the realization finally settling in. The man he had accused of disruption had just become the face of reform. Elijah took Maya's hand once more, and for the first time that afternoon, he smiled not in triumph, but in clarity. The crowd watched as he turned back toward the altar, voice firm. Now, let us finish what we started. And with that, the band began to play again, the notes trembling at first, then rising, reclaiming the space that prejudice had tried to take. The music returned softly, fragile at first, like the sound itself was afraid to exist. The string quartet played a slow, steady melody, and guests began to breathe again. Elijah and Maya stood together beneath the arch of white roses, but the mood had changed. This was no longer just a wedding, it had become a statement. The police chief, Lorraine Grant, stepped back, folding her arms as her team began clearing the perimeter. She wanted to give them their moment, but her eyes stayed on Officer Hale, who now looked smaller than his uniform. The mayor gave a quiet nod to Elijah. You have the floor, son, he said. Elijah turned toward the guests and the cameras. Before we continue, he began, I need to say something. His voice was calm but heavy with truth. Moments ago, someone called the police because they saw joy where they expected silence. They saw unity where they assumed disorder. They saw us, and they thought we did not belong. He let the words hang there, letting everyone feel their weight. But look around, he continued. We are not intruders. We are the future this city promised. And I will not let fear rewrite what love built here today. The crowd broke into soft applause, but Elijah lifted a hand, asking for stillness. I know some of you think this ends when the music starts again, he said. But for me, it does not. This is not the first time I have been mistaken for something I am not. And if I am being honest, it probably will not be the last. His eyes drifted past the crowd, beyond the garden, toward something only he could see. When I was 23, he said quietly, I bought my first property, a small house in Detroit. I walked into the bank with my paperwork ready, dressed sharp, confident. The manager looked me in the eye and said, You people are getting too bold with these loan requests. I walked out, built my business from nothing, and 2 years later I bought the building that bank was in. The crowd murmured, some in disbelief, some in pride. That was the day I learned, silence does not protect dignity, action does. Lorraine listened, her expression unreadable but her posture proud. You built something powerful out of that pain, she said. Elijah nodded slowly. Pain builds clarity if you let it. The mayor stepped closer, his tone softer now. Elijah, the city owes you more than words. You deserve the truth made public. Elijah shook his head. No one owes me anything. What we owe is progress. He turned toward Hale again, the man who had started it all, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Officer Hale, he said, his tone neither cruel nor forgiving, you can stand here and learn with the rest of us, or you can walk away unchanged. Either way, the record will show what happened today. Hale swallowed hard. Sir, I understand. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Do you? Because understanding means you will speak up next time you see this happen to someone else. Hale's voice cracked. I will. Lorraine took a deep breath. Then consider this your first lesson in accountability. You do not protect a city by policing its people. You protect it by serving them. The guests began to clap again, louder now, more certain. Maya turned to Elijah and whispered, You have turned our wedding into a movement. Elijah smiled faintly. Maybe both can exist in the same place. The quartet shifted into a brighter tune. The air began to lift. The tension that had settled like dust began to fade. Elijah looked up at the sky and said quietly, Let the record show that love stood its ground. And for the first time that day, the sound of celebration returned, unshaken, unstoppable, and wholly theirs. As the ceremony resumed, the tension began to thin, but its shadow remained heavy across the garden. The guests smiled again, yet every smile carried the memory of what had just unfolded. The band played softly, the music weaving between relief and reflection. Elijah stood tall beside Maya, his hand steady around hers. He had not expected the moment to become public history, but he had learned long ago that life did not wait for permission to reveal truth. The officiant, an older pastor with a deep voice that carried like thunder through calm air, cleared his throat and said, Sometimes God does not test us with loss, but with visibility. He turned to Elijah and Maya. The world was meant to see this union today, because love and courage chose to stand in the same place. His words settled over the crowd like prayer. Elijah's mother, seated in the front row, dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering softly, That is my son. The ceremony continued, but midway through the vows, Lorraine Grant's phone vibrated in her jacket. She glanced at the screen, and her jaw tightened. The mayor noticed and leaned toward her. Something wrong? He whispered. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. The dispatcher traced that anonymous call. She replied under her breath. It came from a private security contractor, the same company that handles surveillance for this neighborhood's HOA. The mayor's expression darkened. You are saying this was orchestrated? Lorraine nodded grimly. Not random. Someone wanted that response. Someone expected a scene. Elijah noticed their quiet exchange. He kept his composure for the guests, finishing his vows, but his instincts sharpened. The moment the applause broke, he turned to Lorraine and the mayor. You found something, did you not? Lorraine did not waste time. We believe the call was premeditated. The dispatcher confirmed it was labeled as high priority by a private contact before it was routed to our system. Elijah's eyes narrowed. A setup. It looks that way, Lorraine answered. And it would not be the first time a neighborhood has used back channels to push certain families out. The crowd around them began to whisper again as word spread. Maya's grip on Elijah's hand tightened. They tried to ruin our day, she said quietly. Elijah nodded slowly. No, they gave it meaning. He turned to the mayor. How deep does this go? The mayor sighed. If that security firm filed false reports, it will face state investigation. But this neighborhood association, its board, is full of old money. They have influence. Elijah's tone hardened, though his voice never rose. Then let us show them influence used right. Lorraine met his eyes. What are you thinking? Elijah looked out over the crowd, his mind moving faster than his pulse. This story will spread. People will talk about how a black wedding was interrupted by bias and how that bias had a name and a contract. If we are going to face this, we face it with evidence. He turned to the camera crew still filming from a distance. Do not cut the feed, he said firmly. Record this entire conversation. The truth should not depend on who edits it. The mayor hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Transparency it is. The guests fell quiet again, realizing something bigger was unfolding. Elijah stepped forward, the afternoon light glinting off the gold trim of the arch behind him. We will celebrate tonight, he said, but tomorrow we will start something larger. We will audit every report, every private security call that uses the word unfamiliar. Lorraine gave a small nod of approval. You are turning a wedding into a reform movement, she said softly. Elijah smiled faintly. Or maybe it was always supposed to be both. The crowd erupted in applause once more, this time not out of pity or relief, but out of conviction. The sound rolled through the garden like thunder meeting sunlight, loud, certain, and impossible to silence. As the evening sky deepened into gold and violet, the wedding guests gathered under a canopy of string lights. The reception tables shimmered with glass and laughter again, but underneath the celebration ran a pulse of something bigger. Truth had entered the room and refused to leave. Elijah and Maya moved from table to table, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, and offering reassurance that their day had not been stolen, only rewritten. Lorraine Grant stood at the edge of the reception, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression hard. "Yes, confirm the chain of authorization," she said quietly. "If that call was pre-cleared by the HOA, I want the paperwork tonight." She ended the call and walked toward the mayor, who was reviewing his own messages. "It is worse than we thought," she said. "The contractor who filed the report is linked to a former city council member who opposed your smart district reforms." The mayor's brows furrowed. "So this was political." Lorraine nodded. "A manufactured incident to humiliate the city's biggest new partner and to remind him of his place." Elijah approached just in time to hear the last part. "Remind me of my place?" he said quietly. "That is the oldest trick in the book." Lorraine's voice softened. "I am sorry, Elijah. I have seen this play out before. They use authority as a weapon, not a shield." Elijah glanced toward the dance floor where Maya was speaking with their guests, her gown catching the light like a promise that would not fade. "They underestimated the one thing they cannot control," he said. "Visibility." He turned back to Lorraine and the mayor. "Tomorrow morning I will call a press conference at City Hall. If they wanted this to be public, we will make it permanent." The mayor hesitated. "You want to go that far on your wedding weekend?" Elijah smiled faintly. "When history knocks on your door, you do not ask it to come back later." Lorraine let out a low chuckle. "You sound like a man who has been planning this moment his whole life." Elijah shook his head. "No, just a man who has lived it enough times to know when to stop running." The band shifted to a slow tune as Maya returned to his side. "What are you two plotting?" she asked with a soft grin. Elijah looked at her lovingly. "Justice, apparently." She smiled wider. "Then make sure you dance first." The guests laughed as he led her to the center of the floor. Cameras flashed again, but this time for the right reasons. The sound of applause filled the air as they moved together, calm, graceful, unbroken. The mayor leaned toward Lorraine. "You realize this will reach the state networks by morning?" Lorraine nodded. "Good. Let them see what change looks like in real time." As the song faded, Elijah took the microphone. "Before the night ends," he said, his voice firm but warm, "I want to thank everyone here for standing when you could have sat, for speaking when silence would have been easier, and for witnessing what truth feels like when it does not ask permission." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Tomorrow, we will begin something new, a coalition that protects communities from discriminatory reporting. Every false call will have accountability. Every assumption will have consequence." The guests clapped again, some standing in ovation. Maya placed her hand on his arm and whispered, "You turned pain into purpose." Elijah looked down at her and replied, "It is the only way pain stops winning." The night continued, laughter returning with courage. Even Officer Hale, still standing quietly near the back, seemed changed, his posture humbler, his silence more aware. Lorraine noticed him and nodded once, a silent reminder that redemption starts with recognition. The lights above flickered softly, as if the city itself was listening. The music swelled once more, and for the first time that day, everything felt exactly as it should. Love restored, truth recorded, and dignity unshaken. The next morning arrived with the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. The city skyline shimmered under pale sunlight, and the news cycle was already burning with headlines about what had happened at the Brooks wedding. Police response at Black Tech CEO's wedding sparks citywide debate. Bias or procedure? A celebration interrupted. Mayor and police chief witness racial profiling in real time. Every outlet had a version, but all shared one truth. The story had escaped containment. Elijah stood by the window of his penthouse suite, still wearing the same silver cufflinks from the ceremony. Maya joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. "They are calling you the calm storm," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "That is one way to say I did not lose my temper." She turned to look at him. "You could have. No one would have blamed you." He nodded. "But if I had, they would have forgotten what really happened." Downstairs, Lorraine Grant and the mayor waited in the hotel's conference room. Laptops were open, documents spread across the table. When Elijah and Maya arrived, Lorraine gestured to the screen. "The trace results came back early this morning. The call that triggered the incident came from a number registered to Horizon, secure the same firm that manages 3 high-profile residential zones in this city, including this one. The mayor frowned, and guess who signed their licensing contract? Councilman Darnell Price. Elijah crossed his arms. Price, the same man who fought against the Smart District proposal last quarter. Lorraine nodded grimly. He is connected to the firm through an investment trust. This was more than harassment. It was sabotage. Maya spoke up, her tone calm but sharp. So they used bias as a business tactic. Exactly, Lorraine replied. They knew what kind of response a call like that would trigger. They wanted a public moment to embarrass you. The mayor rubbed his temples. They underestimated the camera. Elijah's voice was steady but resolute. Then we give them the full picture. I will not let this be another story that fades after outrage cools. Lorraine leaned forward. We are with you. What is your move? Elijah looked between them. A press conference. Noon today. On the steps of City Hall. We release everything: body cam footage, dispatch logs, and the HOA's internal emails. They built this narrative on silence. We will answer it with evidence. The mayor hesitated. It will shake the city's political ground. Elijah met his gaze. Then let it shake. Foundations that crack under truth were never strong enough to build on. Maya reached for his hand. If you do this, it will change everything. Elijah nodded. That is the point. Lorraine exhaled slowly. I will make the arrangements. The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of what was coming sinking in. Outside, the faint hum of traffic rose as the city awakened to its own reflection. Maya looked at Elijah. You ready to tell them who you really are? He smiled slightly, a quiet confidence returning to his eyes. Not just who I am, he said, but what we are all worth. At exactly 11:30, a convoy of black sedans rolled toward City Hall. Reporters gathered like waves on the steps, microphones raised, cameras ready. The city's heartbeat quickened, and for once, it was not fear that powered it. It was anticipation. By noon, the steps of City Hall were crowded with reporters, citizens, and cameras. The air was thick with curiosity and tension, the kind that always precedes truth. Elijah Brooks stood behind the podium wearing a navy suit and a calm expression that had become his signature. To his right stood Maya, poised and unflinching. On his left, the mayor and police chief Lorraine Grant watched in silence, giving him the floor. The murmurs quieted as Elijah adjusted the microphone. Yesterday, he began, his voice steady. My wedding was interrupted by an officer responding to a call about a suspicious gathering. That phrase alone should tell you everything about what is wrong. The crowd leaned closer, some nodding, some recording on their phones. The truth is, he continued, the only thing suspicious about our celebration was the color of the people who attended it. He paused, letting the words echo against the marble columns. But this is not just about me. This is about how bias hides behind official language words like procedure, protocol, and concern, and how those words become weapons when unchecked. Lorraine stepped forward and placed a folder on the podium. These are the dispatch logs and body camera footage from the incident, she said. They are being released publicly, effective immediately. Elijah nodded in thanks, then continued. We now know that the call which triggered this event came from a private security firm, one hired by the local homeowners association, connected through financial interests to a member of our city council. Gasps and camera flashes erupted. This was not a misunderstanding, Elijah said. It was manipulation, a calculated attempt to weaponize fear for political and financial gain. The mayor stepped to the microphone. And let me be clear, he said firmly. Any council member found to have abused public trust will be removed from office. No exceptions. The crowd began to clap, a low ripple of agreement spreading through the plaza. Elijah raised his hand for silence again. This moment is not just about accountability, he said. It is about transformation. Every community in this city deserves safety without suspicion, joy without justification, and freedom without permission. A reporter shouted from the crowd, Mr. Brooks, do you plan to take legal action? Elijah looked out over the sea of microphones. No, he said calmly. I plan to take leadership action. Starting today, I am launching the Clear Signal Initiative, a program designed to audit every private security contract in this city and ensure that no resident is ever targeted based on appearance or assumption again. The audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. Lorraine smiled subtly, pride flickering in her eyes. "This initiative," Elijah continued, "will partner with the mayor's office and the police department to implement real accountability, body camera transparency, citizen oversight boards, and mandatory bias training for both public and private officers." Another reporter shouted, "Do you think people will actually support this?" Elijah's expression remained calm, but his voice grew stronger. "People do not follow titles. They follow truth. And when truth stands tall, even those who once doubted it will find themselves standing too." The applause swelled louder this time. Maya stepped forward and slipped her hand into his, her eyes shining. The cameras captured it all, the image of unity and courage that could not be spun or softened. As the mayor stepped back to the podium, he said, "Let it be known that this city does not hide from its failures, it rebuilds from them." Elijah glanced at the crowd one last time. "Yesterday they tried to shame a wedding. Today, we begin rewriting the policy that allowed it." The plaza exploded in applause. Cameras clicked like thunder, and the moment carved itself into history. What had started as humiliation had now become reform, and for the first time, the city was truly listening. The sound of applause from the city hall steps carried across the plaza and spilled into the downtown streets. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and social media feeds erupted with live streams of the event. Elijah Brooks had not just spoken. He had shifted the tone of the entire city. The crowd began chanting his name, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of something deeper, a quiet revolution born from dignity, not outrage. Maya stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly as they stepped away from the podium. Lorraine Grant followed closely, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages from state officials and media outlets. "They are calling this the Brooks Reform," she said with a half-smile. "It is already trending nationwide." Elijah glanced at her. "Then let us make sure it deserves the name." As they entered City Hall, the echo of their footsteps replaced the noise of the crowd outside. Inside the mayor's private conference room, screens flickered with updates, live feeds, and public reactions. The mayor closed the door behind them. "The governor just called," he said. "He wants a briefing within the hour. You have stirred up more than you know." Elijah nodded. "Good. It means people are finally paying attention." The mayor sighed, then smiled faintly. "You remind me of someone who used to believe this job could change the world." Elijah replied calmly. "It still can, if people in that job remember who they work for." Lorraine looked at both men and said, "We will need a task force immediately. If we are serious about this initiative, we cannot let the news cycle outpace the reform." "Agreed," Elijah said. "We will start with data. Transparency first, policy second. People need to see what has been happening before they believe it can stop." The mayor nodded and picked up the phone to summon his communications team. While they prepared statements, Maya walked to the window overlooking the crowd still gathered outside. "Look at them," she said softly. "They are not just watching, they are waiting for change." Elijah joined her, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "Then let us give them something to wait for." Lorraine's phone buzzed again. She frowned as she read the message. "You might want to see this," she said. She turned the screen toward Elijah and the mayor. A video clip from the previous day's incident had gone viral overnight, Officer Hale's voice shouting, "Stop the music! Hands where I can see them!" followed by the revelation that the mayor and police chief had been among the guests. The comments flooded in by the thousands. Some were angry, some supportive, but most shared one word: finally. Elijah watched silently, then said, "It is not about him anymore. It is about what made him think that was normal." The mayor leaned back in his chair. "Then make that your next message." Elijah nodded slowly. "Tomorrow." Outside, the chants began again, louder this time. "Justice with grace, justice with grace." Lorraine smiled faintly. "That is your signature line now." Elijah chuckled softly. "No, it is our reminder." As the afternoon light faded into a soft orange hue, the city began to change in ways no one could yet see. Law students began organizing forums. Civil rights groups called to offer partnerships. Even officers from other districts reached out quietly, thanking Lorraine for standing firm. A movement had begun not from anger, but from composure. Elijah turned back to the mayor and Lorraine. "When this is over," he said, "there will be people who claim they always supported us. Let them talk. Our proof will not be in speeches, it will be in systems." Lorraine nodded firmly. Then let us start building them. As the meeting concluded, Elijah took one last look outside at the crowd that refused to leave. The city lights reflected in his eyes like small flames, steady, deliberate, unbreakable. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was not destruction, it was awakening. And for the first time in years, justice did not sound like anger. It sounded like progress. By the following week, the city had transformed into a living conversation. Billboards that once advertised luxury apartments now displayed messages about equality and accountability. Local news stations replayed Elijah Brooks's press conference in full, calling it one of the most defining civic moments in a decade. Yet, behind the cameras and applause, real work had begun. Inside a high-rise office overlooking downtown, Elijah stood with Lorraine Grant, reviewing the first drafts of the Clear Signal Initiative proposal. The walls were covered with charts, photographs, and transcripts from prior bias-related calls that had gone unchallenged. Lorraine tapped one of the reports on the wall. "This one," she said, "a black teenager delivering groceries last month, stopped twice by private patrols in the same hour. No charges, no apology, no follow-up." Elijah exhaled slowly. "That is what we are changing. No more invisible incidents." Lorraine nodded. "Transparency is the start. Reform is the outcome." Maya entered, carrying coffee for the team. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were serious. "You know the networks are calling this the second wave of civil accountability, right?" Elijah gave a quiet laugh. "They love their headlines. But this is not a wave. This is a foundation." Lorraine looked at him. "Foundations take time and resistance." "Then let them resist," Elijah replied. "Change does not need permission." Just then the mayor entered, holding a folder marked Council Review. His expression was determined but cautious. "We have the votes," he said, "but barely. Some council members are already calling this an overreach." Elijah took the folder. When fairness feels like overreach, it means inequality has been comfortable too long. The mayor gave a small nod. "The governor has requested to meet you personally, Elijah. He wants to align the initiative with the state's equity framework." Maya smiled. "That is progress." Elijah's face remained thoughtful. "Or politics. We will see which one it is when we meet." Lorraine looked out the window at the city below. "Whatever it is, it started with a wedding. I doubt anyone in this city will forget that." Elijah walked to the window beside her, watching as people gathered in the plaza below, holding signs that read, "Clear Signal Now" and "Justice Without Noise." "They already made it theirs," he said softly. "That is the point. It belongs to everyone who ever felt unseen." Maya walked up behind him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You know, people are saying that moment on the steps, the way you stood silent before speaking, that changed how they see leadership." Elijah smiled slightly. "Silence used right is not weakness. It is control." The mayor looked at his watch. "Council meeting starts in 30 minutes. If this passes, we will make history on record." Elijah turned back to the room, his voice calm but charged with purpose. "We already did. Today, we make it permanent." Lorraine gathered the files. "Let us go make sure justice has ink on paper." As they left the office, the city lights reflected in the glass walls around them, flickering like 1,000 unspoken promises. Down in the plaza, the crowd grew louder, their chants rhythmic, steady, unified. The sound was not chaos, it was clarity. And for Elijah Brooks, the man who had once been interrupted at his own wedding, this was the sound of reclaiming narrative, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told to quiet down and wait their turn. Not this time. The council chamber was packed, every seat filled and every hallway crowded with citizens who had come to witness history unfold. The walls buzzed with anticipation, the kind that makes even silence feel loud. Elijah Brooks sat near the front beside Maya, his expression calm, his hands clasped together. Across the room, Lorraine Grant stood with a tablet in her hand, reviewing the final draft of the Clear Signal Initiative. The mayor moved between the rows of council members, ensuring that the vote would proceed without delay. When the session opened, the chairwoman of the city council struck her gavel once, and the room fell into complete stillness. "This meeting," she said, "will decide whether our city officially adopts the Clear Signal Initiative, a policy that mandates transparency, accountability, and anti-bias regulation for all private and public safety organizations." Her voice echoed off the marble walls. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to make a final statement?" Elijah rose slowly, buttoning his jacket as he walked toward the microphone. The cameras followed every movement. "When I stood at this podium last week," he began, "I did not plan to start a movement. I was simply asking for my humanity to be respected. But somewhere between silence and outrage, this city chose something different. It chose awareness." He paused as the council chamber listened in silence. The Clear Signal Initiative is not a favor to any one group. It is a correction. It says that security cannot come at the expense of equality, and that protection means nothing if it is not shared. The crowd murmured softly in agreement. Elijah continued, "This policy is not just about avoiding another incident like mine. It is about ensuring that when people celebrate, they do not have to prove they belong first. It is about replacing suspicion with service and fear with fairness." Lorraine nodded subtly, pride glinting in her eyes. "Every camera in this city should reflect truth, not prejudice," Elijah said. "And every officer, public or private, should carry their authority with empathy, not assumption." The mayor leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. The floor will now open for the vote." The digital board behind the council lit up with names as each member cast their decision. Green lights appeared slowly, one after another, and the tension in the room thickened. Then, after the final vote, the tally displayed across the screen. 12 in favor, 1 opposed. The room erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the chamber. Some council members stood to shake Elijah's hand. Others simply clapped, understanding the weight of what had just been done. Lorraine turned to him. "It is official," she said. "You just changed policy." Elijah looked out at the crowd, his voice steady. "No," he said softly. "We changed perspective." Maya slipped her arm through his, her eyes shining with quiet pride. This time, the system had to listen. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions about what came next, but Elijah raised a hand. "What comes next," he said, "is enforcement. Words without follow-through are just speeches. We will make sure this policy lives in every department, every neighborhood, every home." The mayor stepped forward and placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You have given this city something it forgot it had," he said. "A conscience." Lorraine smiled. "And a standard." Outside, the bells of City Hall began to ring, their sound carried by the wind into the streets below where crowds had gathered, holding signs that read, "Clear Signal Approved," and "Justice with Grace." Elijah and Maya stepped out onto the balcony, the city stretching before them bathed in late afternoon light. For the first time in a long time, progress did not feel like a dream, it felt like a fact. And as Elijah looked down at the people cheering below, he whispered to Maya, "They did not just vote for a policy, they voted for a new beginning." The following morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of City Hall, reflecting against the marble floors like a new beginning had physically arrived. The Clear Signal Initiative had passed, and overnight, the city had awakened differently. News outlets across the country replayed the footage from the vote. Elijah Brooks standing beside Maya, Lorraine Grant, and the mayor, as the council declared the reform official. But while the world celebrated, Elijah's mind was already moving forward. He knew that policy without practice was just decoration. In his office, overlooking the plaza still filled with supporters, he met with Lorraine and the mayor once more. "We did it," the mayor said with relief. "You did it," Elijah corrected. "Now we prove it works," Lorraine nodded. "The first audit team has already been assembled. They will begin reviewing every security call from the past 2 years. I want a full public report." Elijah smiled faintly. "That is exactly what I was hoping to hear." Maya entered the room, holding a folder filled with letters. "These came overnight," she said. "Hundreds of people from other cities asking if the initiative can be adopted where they live." She placed the folder on the table. "You started something bigger than you imagined." Elijah took her hand gently. "We started it together." Lorraine scrolled through her phone and looked up. "Do you want to hear the latest?" Elijah nodded. "Officer Hale has been reassigned to community engagement training," she said, voluntarily. "He asked to speak at schools about implicit bias." Elijah raised his eyebrows. "That is unexpected." Lorraine smiled slightly. "You inspired more than you realize." The mayor turned toward Elijah. "The governor called this morning. The state wants to model the Clear Signal Initiative as a pilot for statewide reform." Elijah stood silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of it. Then he said quietly, "Good. Let it spread. That is how justice becomes culture, not just news." Outside, The plaza had transformed into a symbol of renewal. People from all walks of life, students, workers, even police officers, stood together holding banners that read, "Clarity is justice," and "Dignity has no color." News drones hovered above, capturing a city no longer divided by fear, but united by accountability. Maya looked out the window beside him. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked softly. Elijah's eyes drifted into memory, the sound of a voice shouting, "Stop the music," the fear, the disbelief, the moment that had almost turned joy into trauma. "I do," he said. "And I think about how close we were to letting it define us instead of transform us." He turned toward her, his tone steady. "They wanted that moment to be about humiliation. We turned it into education." Lorraine folded her arms, smiling. "That should be on the City Hall plaque." The mayor chuckled. "I can arrange that." Elijah looked out once more, his reflection merging with the skyline. "No need," he said quietly. "Every time a person walks these streets without being profiled, that will be the plaque." As he spoke, the City Hall clock began to chime noon. Reporters gathered again, this time not for conflict but for confirmation. Elijah stepped out onto the balcony where he had stood before. The crowd erupted in applause. He raised his hand for calm and spoke into the microphone. "1 week ago, they told us to stop the music. Today, the city is playing its own song." The applause deepened, carrying through the plaza like a promise fulfilled. Maya stood beside him, smiling. The mayor and Lorraine joined them, forming a line that looked less like power and more like partnership. Elijah's final words echoed through the air. "Justice is not about noise, it is about notes that last. And this city will keep playing until every ear hears the same tune." The crowd rose to its feet, and for the first time since that fateful day, the music resumed not just from instruments, but from the rhythm of progress itself. The next morning, the sun rose over Washington, D.C., with a kind of light that felt deliberate, like the city itself understood that a page was turning. Leah Robinson walked through the glass corridor of the Bureau's headquarters, her reflection beside her like a twin made of purpose. The meeting with the White House was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Carla Evans waited at the end of the hall, a folder tucked under her arm, her usual calm replaced by quiet pride. "They are ready for you," she said softly. Leah nodded, her heels striking the marble in a steady rhythm that sounded like resolve. Inside the Situation Room, a collection of the nation's highest officials sat around a long, polished table. The president was not present, but his chief of staff and the attorney general were, alongside military advisors and senior federal directors. It was not a confrontation, it was recognition. Leah took her seat, her badge glinting against the tailored black of her jacket. The attorney general spoke first. "Agent Robinson, Operation Clarity has reached 47 states. The results are measurable. Complaints down, accountability up. You have done in months what politics could not do in decades." Leah looked around the room, her voice calm but commanding. "What I did was survive something the system created, and then I refused to let it continue. That is not power, that is responsibility." The chief of staff leaned forward. "The president wants to expand your program internationally, training exchange, human rights collaboration. You would lead the first division." Leah's gaze met his. "Then we make sure it never loses its purpose. Reform means nothing if it turns into branding." The room fell silent. The truth of her words carried its own gravity. Carla spoke next, her tone firm. "Agent Robinson has proven that law enforcement can be both strong and accountable. This country owes her a structure that keeps that truth alive." The attorney general smiled faintly. "We agree." Papers shifted, pens scratched signatures, and just like that, what began as one woman's humiliation was now written into policy. Leah's thoughts drifted briefly to that night in Dallas, the asphalt, the crowd, the sound of disbelief. The wound was no longer raw, but it would never fade completely. She carried it not as pain but as proof. After the meeting, she stepped outside into the crisp air. Reporters waited behind the barricades, cameras aimed but respectful this time. One voice called out, "Agent Robinson, what do you call what you did here?" Leah stopped, turned slightly, and answered without hesitation. "I did not change the system. I reminded it who it was supposed to serve." Her words carried over the noise of shutters and wind. Carla joined her on the steps, smiling quietly. "That line is going to be quoted for decades." Leah chuckled softly. "Then let it mean something every time it is repeated." They stood together for a moment, watching the flag ripple above the White House in the morning Sunday. Leah's phone buzzed with a message from Daniels. Dallas police just renamed their community center Robinson Hall. She stared at the screen, exhaling deeply. Justice is not revenge, she whispered. It is repair. The breeze lifted her hair, the city humming beneath the sound of history in motion. For the first time since that night, Leah felt peace not because the world had changed, but because she knew she had started something that would not stop when she did. The camera would fade there, the image of a woman standing where pain once broke her, unshaken, unbowed, and finally heard,